Hey, how's it going?
How's it going, Zach? Gavin, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. We're excited to talk to you. We were just pondering all of the psychedelic related questions we could throw your way.
Can't wait. Hope you got some good ones.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you reached out to us about the work that you guys are doing over at the Bay Staters for Natural Medicine. And we've talked on the show before to Decriminalize Nature DC, which was a group that got on the ballot. Basically, the question, should we decriminalize psychedelic mushrooms and other entheogens? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. That the ballot measure succeeded. And there's been similar actions across the country. We saw in Oregon the decriminalization of all drugs. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe introduce what Bay Staters for Natural Medicine is about, and compare and contrast your guys' mission to the work of those other groups across the nation. Also, it looks like our other guest is here, Jen. Still, welcome.
Hey, Jen, how's it going?
Hello.
Hi.
So Jen, Zach and Gavin just asked us to explain the mission of Bay Staters for Natural Medicine and how it compares to the movements we see around the country to decriminalize plant medicine, as well as in the war on drugs as a whole. So I guess I'll kick us off with that answer.
And you guys can introduce yourselves too.
Absolutely. Good place to start. So I'm a lead organizer for Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, originally from Newton, Kansas, not Massachusetts. Actually, how I heard about
another
the
Kansas
podcast. Yeah, absolutely. So just wanted to rep my home state. I have always had a bleeding heart for ending the war on drugs. I grew up in a trailer park where just a few doors down, when I was 5 years old, a meth lab exploded. And juxtaposition that prohibition caused public health incident with the Adderall that was used in colleges and prescribed, the amphetamines that are already legal.
I took my whole fucking adolescence, man. I've taken so many amphetamine salt prescriptions or adjacent, Vyvanse, you name it.
Absolutely. And we have teammates who are finally able to overcome reliance on those stimulants by using microdoses of psilocybin. So I hope we can get into some of that a little later.
Really interesting to talk about.
And then I wanted to give Jen maybe the chance to introduce yourself and how plant medicine has helped you. My story is not as interesting as hers. I just have, very close family members who have struggled with addiction to opiates and been through that cycle of rehab, jail, and not knowing whether they're going to pull through or if they'll actually overdose and get a hold of fentanyl. And I think that our country and the state of Massachusetts is demanding new solutions because these plant medicines have proven benefits, and it's time we make them equitably available. So Jen, if you don't mind sharing a bit about your story, we'd be super grateful.
Yeah, no, not at all. Hi, my name is Jen. I'm a resident in Massachusetts. I've been a registered nurse here for over 13 years.
Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for the work that you've been doing as a nurse.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting.
We're happy
it's nice to know that people are actually listening and taking interest in this movement, because it's changed my life in so many ways, and I've known a lot of people whose lives have been changed. I actually, when I was 8 years old, was diagnosed with chronic cluster headaches, which are extremely painful. They're actually dubbed suicide headaches because many people end up killing themselves because the pain is so excruciating. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with chronic migraine on top of the cluster headaches. And by the time I was 15, I was introduced to heroin and became a heroin addict. Got off it for a little bit, went back on opiates in my late 20s that were prescribed to me. And then after the death of my mother, I ended up relapsing. My last relapse actually ended with me trying to commit suicide, which was a failure. I'm obviously here. But during that time, it was a pretty low point in my life, and I knew that rehab was not going to work. Detoxes don't work. They're not designed to make people better. They're designed to generate money. I didn't want to be on methadone or Suboxone or any of the money generators for the businesses. I wanted to be off it completely. And a friend of my brother's reached out and said that they had a connection to somebody in the States that would do Ibogaine treatments. So I actually took all my life savings. I went down to get my treatment at that point, which was a completely eye-opening experience. It was an amazing journey, very spiritually opening, but there was a lot of work to be done afterwards, which I knew there was going to be work, but I wasn't aware of just how much work it actually was going to take. I ended up having a few slip-ups. I didn't relapse, but a couple of mental breakdowns during that point. And but when I was down getting my treatment, a woman had told me that I should try psilocybin for my cluster headaches, which was the biggest change in my life. I did about 3.5 grams of shrooms, and for 6 months I was pain-free, which was the first time in my entire life that I can remember going any extended period of time without any pain. Because of that, I was no longer living in fear. I had a lot of anxiety and depression about my migraines. I was trying diets and herbal supplements and all kinds of different modalities and treatments that, would give me a little reprieve, but then it would come right back. So to have something that actually worked long term was just utterly amazing for me, and changed my life in so many ways. During my teens, I was also arrested for cannabis, which I used to treat my many of my symptoms like nausea and light sensitivity. I was given an ultimatum: either spend 2.5 years in this really abusive treatment center in New York or go to prison for 10 years. So I chose to actually go to the treatment program, and suffered a lot of trauma, which psilocybin has also helped me completely overcome, and get to terms with. So I'm on this on all different fronts. I'm for the people who are suffering emotionally, who are suffering physically, who are suffering with addiction, because it's changed my life in all those ways. I'm a completely different person. I have a new purpose. And each time I do shrooms for my migraines, because I'm not one of those people that got to take it and I'm just cured for life, but I use it periodically, and actually just tripped out a couple of weeks ago. And my last trip was, my body talked to me and told me, hey, you need to stop trying to beat me and just love me. And I didn't understand what that meant. And so shrooms has opened up this door to teach me how to love myself and what that means. It's not egotistical or something, where you're bragging about yourself, but where, instead of taking something to beat something, like I'm doing this to beat addiction, I'm doing this to beat my pain, I'm actually doing it because I love myself and I want to see myself do better in life. And psilocybin gets you in touch with that part of your world and your inner self that you just don't get in medicine and any other ways.
Well,
I mean, go on about many of the treatments I've been on.
Well, first and
failures.
foremost, Jen, thank you so much for having the courage to share that story and come on our show and be be so vulnerable and open about the experiences that you've had, because I know that's just a really difficult thing to do. But Gavin.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Jen. Thank you so much for not only having the courage to come out and share your story and how these plants have affected your road to recovery and all of that, but also for fighting for other people's rights, because human beings for all of history have been using psychedelic medicines for therapeutic and medicinal reasons, and we've really lost touch with that as a society and as a human culture. And the fact that not only have we lost touch with that, but it's been criminalized, that relationship with these plants. It's something that a lot of people don't really think about because they just associate these plants with, crazy drugged out experiences, what they've seen in the movies maybe, or lazy people, yeah. Some notion of, crazy hippies running through the field naked. People don't really understand the actual relationship that, like I said, human culture has always had with these substances, and there's no reason why they wouldn't still be helping people to this day, like yourself, like so many others. And just for anyone that might not be aware, you've treated yourself with these drugs, but they've been illegal while you've done so, correct? So you're now fighting for people to be able to treat themselves with these drugs too, but not have to do it under the table, not have to do it in a maybe potentially shady or criminalized fashion.
yeah, I believe that having access to this is pivotal, and not only just healing the individual self, but healing our communities. If people really want to talk about ending stigmas and racism, the way to do that is to end this ridiculous war on drugs, and stop criminalizing people who are not actually, engaging in criminal behavior, but are actually trying to heal themselves. One of the things that I feel like psychedelics can give back is finding self, which is something I feel like a lot of people in this world have lost. There's a lot of people that are just depressed and anxious and are completely lost in this world, and they have no idea how to get in touch with themselves. And so they tell you, if you can't love yourself and you can't heal yourself, then you're not going to be able to heal the people around you. And so we need to start with the self, which is what psychedelics help bring out, is regrounding people and showing you, like, what are we all here for? We are all connected in this world. This world was made for us to enjoy and to engage with one another. And instead, people are trying to take and hoard and own what's theirs. But that's not really what the whole thing is all about.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you guys, and I'll open this up to either of you. Have you noticed, since you've begun your work in this movement, yeah, obviously you guys are based in Massachusetts, which has legalized cannabis, both recreationally and for medicinal usage. So the state has, shown, and we've seen this as a more common occurrence than I thought. It seems to have caught on a lot of states, that even states you might not immediately think of, like Illinois. They've moved in the direction of legalizing cannabis. Oklahoma, I believe, has medically legalized cannabis as a way of helping their farming population. So we've seen a real shift in public, opinion, public perception of a drug like cannabis, and people have started to really understand that it has a medicinal purpose at its foremost, as well as countless other purposes that we don't have to get into right now. But I'm wondering, are you starting to see that shift with psychedelics as well? I can't remember the name of the book that came out not too long ago about the food author. She wrote for the New York Times about his. Anyway, I had the book on my shelf. I never read it, but anyways, one of those really popular books about psychedelics, and it reached the mainstream kind of neoliberal audience, right? He did the MSNBC tour, talking about how these drugs had healing benefits. Gosh, I'm kicking myself because I can't remember this guy's name.
Michael Pollan.
Michael Pollan. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah, How to Change Your Mind was the book that I, maybe read the first chapter of. But what's the public reaction to when you talk about this now? Because I feel like, there really is a public understanding and a public acceptance of something like cannabis, even though it is still criminalized in a lot of areas, including Gavin and I's neighbor state, and all Gavin, James, and I's home state of Kansas, which is, still really draconian in its policy. But, what's the reaction like for, specifically Entheogens in Massachusetts?
So you're absolutely right, Zach. Public perception of cannabis policy has shifted dramatically over the last decade. In fact, a study showed that a majority of evangelicals and Republicans, categories not too friendly, you'd assume, to drug policy, now are slimly in favor of legalization of cannabis. What's really important to our group is that we take advantage of people's skepticism of prohibition in general, and we frame the issue in a way that people understand and can relate to. And we've done that really successfully in Massachusetts. We lean into the fact that these are plants, that these are naturally occurring solutions. Everyone knows someone who has been impacted by addiction or depression. Massachusetts in particular has the highest millennial depression rate of any state. And we very sadly lose about 170 of our neighbors every month to opioid overdoses. So when we frame it through that lens of public health, people are very accepting and very eager to move past the war on drugs. Our work was recently covered in the Boston Globe, and they cited a study showing two out of three people in Massachusetts believe that we should treat all drugs as a public health issue. So what I would say to advocates in any state, including in Kansas, where I've actually worked in drug policy as well, is don't be afraid to make the case that this is simply better for community and public health, because it absolutely is. You don't have to get into like deeper spiritual arguments. Those are useful and can really connect with people, and they're an essential part of having a psychedelic therapy and integration. But framing this as an issue that's positive for taxpayers and positive for communities is also extremely effective, we found. I'd also say that a core tenet of our organizing strategy in Massachusetts has been people first. Your story matters. So Jen, as incredible as she is, and such a great friend that I've met through this activism, she's really not alone. We have members of our coalition who have overcome almost 30 years of alcoholism by using psilocybin and go on to help others with integration therapy. We have folks who have quit smoking because psilocybin appears to be 45% more effective at helping people quit smoking than the best FDA alternative. So people come to this movement from many, many different perspectives, but their stories are what motivated our lawmakers to actually take action and pass these resolutions. We're very proud to say, and maybe other states would disagree, we're further ahead than any other at ending the war on drugs and legalizing these plants the right way in a lens of equity.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a great segue into a question I have for you guys. And obviously, this is a movement that's still, in its infancy to some respect, and it's still pretty far down the line that we would even be considering something like this. But I'm wondering, when we look at the legalization of cannabis in particular and the way that that's been rolled out across this country, obviously it differs from state to state. But I'm wondering if in the long term, when it comes to legalizing the substances of psilocybin or mescaline, for example, what lessons you would take or apply that we've seen come from the legalization and distribution of cannabis, because I'm worried that when it comes to cannabis and psychedelic drugs, that they're going to be co-opted by big pharma, that they're going to be all the profits are going to be taken by rich white people, even though these medicinal practices have been pioneered by indigenous people largely, that probably won't see any profit or have any entrepreneurial opportunities in these regards. I'm just wondering what you see, either of you, as the correct path to go down as we normalize these as substances, while paying respects to the cultures that pioneered these medicinal practices, and making sure that they're distributed not by big pharmaceutical companies, the same ones that wrought the destruction of the opioid crisis. There's no reason they should be collaborated with as we forge this path forward.
Well, one of the things that I will say is that I believe that the cannabis industry has helped open the door and get people thinking to, okay, so cannabis isn't as bad as people have been saying all these years. It's not this demonstrative substance that people have been telling me, and actually people are getting better. So I think it's making people question. The difference between cannabis and psychedelics like psilocybin and mescaline is that you can't really take psilocybin on a daily basis. I mean, you can as a microdose, but if you're looking to experience a journey, it's not. I don't believe that it has the ability to have shops opening up on every corner. But yeah, having rich white America gain control the way they have in the cannabis industry is definitely a concern. It's been one of my disappointments in the cannabis industry that those of us who were arrested and had our lives turned upside down are actually not profiting from it at all. And the people that were testing us and denying us employment are now the ones who are employing people and making the money. So I think that I'm not exactly sure how to prevent that, other than keep the education out there, let people know where it started, where these things came from. And those of us who want to perform the rituals and bring people through their journeys, really learn the culture and embrace the culture in which it came from, and educate those that are actually participating in those journeys about where this experience started and how it began. I think a lot of it is just education, which I don't think there's been a lot of education out there in the cannabis industry.
And what I would add to that is a lot of our members are growers themselves in Massachusetts of cannabis products. It can take millions of dollars to enter that market. Community host agreements, which the state has, essentially entitle these cities to require you to buy them fire trucks or playgrounds or all number of expensive items in order to open up a cannabis business.
Well, they got to
So
make up the money they're losing from the cops seizing the forfeiting assets of cannabis dealers and cannabis criminals. But yeah.
yeah, it's a great point to make, and there's a lot of connections between that and putting our police departments on the defense. These community host agreements and these other arrangements in the state of Massachusetts make it virtually impossible for a lot of people of color to open up a cannabis business legally. And what we're really committed to as an organization is doing it the right way, not the white way. And what that means is in 2016, when we legalized cannabis, the referendum that white advocates wrote didn't include any measures for equity or social justice for the victims of the war on drugs. The task force bill that we filed with our state lawmakers just yesterday is to study legalization over the next year with a 21 member committee that is stacked with equity advocates and indigenous healers as well, that are going to make recommendations for not just legalizing these plants, but ensuring that companies can't just patent away processes, make it really hard to access psilocybin therapy. And we're really committed to a model of gift, gather, grow, meaning that people will be able to grow psilocybin mushrooms, share them with friends. Cannabis dispensaries might be able to also have a small growing operation. You're probably going to see some economy of scale with outside groups, outside the state, if it's legalized nationally, able to transport it to other states. But it's unlikely there's going to be nearly as many dispensaries as cannabis. People don't physically
not a regularly consumed product.
Right. And most users of psilocybin usually only do it once or twice in their life, but get so much meaning from that experience that they compare it to the birth of their first child, for example. So
it's a real trip if you're not ready for it, that's for sure.
Or I'm thinking of ayahuasca too, where you go to often it's done in a group with a shaman or someone that really knows what they're doing. And I just wonder, in a world where psilocybin and these drugs are legal, ayahuasca, for example, like how the administration of that would take place, like how you would obtain a certificate, like would you have to go to CVS to do it, you know what I'm saying?
Well, we can learn a lot from what happens now. So there's veterans groups in our coalition that literally pay to have folks with PTSD go down to Peru or Mexico or Jamaica to get these treatments. It also demonstrates an issue of equity, and that a lot of rich folks are already getting this therapy in Jamaica.
Yeah, they're just going somewhere else to get it.
Exactly. So I will say there's also underground circles in the United States. They're kind of hard to find, particularly now with COVID, where people try, to apply the lessons from those indigenous ceremonies, because it really is a special one. Not one that I've done personally, but you could see a model where we've legalized these ceremonies, and then people who, either by word of mouth, marketing themselves as being, very authentic and good at conducting this experience for people, or certifications. There's certifications popping up around the United States. But in terms of occupational licensing, we do kind of want to leave it open for people to be able to provide these therapies in a number of different ways, not just through the medical system. But we hope that the task force, with better minds than ours, will be able to kind of balance that.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys that I'm curious about, because obviously, one of the key elements that you've talked about is the ability to use psychedelics and these entheogens as a way to treat addiction and people who have struggled with that. And I do think society is doing a way better job of moving towards understanding addiction as a health issue instead of a criminal issue, which obviously has always been the case. But I'm wondering, do you guys receive any pushback from abstinence, recovery-based groups? I think of somebody like my father, who was, a 25 plus year alcoholic, who is, now extremely devoted to the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous. and the, kind of understanding that program fosters with your relationship to drugs and alcohol and the complete abstinence that it requires. So I'm wondering, do you guys get any pushback from groups like that through the application of these medicines? And, I guess, how do you respond to them when I imagine a lot of those concerns do, at least from the people who are in the program as, recovering addicts, at least come from a good place?
So maybe I can just share a few stories and then hand it off to Jen, who will have so much more to say, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So Alcoholics Anonymous, the evidence indicates, is one of the least successful rehabilitation programs in U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
It helps some people. Something always helps someone.
Sure.
And that's not to say that your father's solution doesn't work for him. But we've found that medication can help people with alcoholism quite a bit. And so it's important that we make these alternatives available, because no solution is going to work for everyone. A lot of people are not going to want to try psychedelic therapy, and that's perfectly fine. We want to have alternatives available to them. In terms of it being a point of opposition, the only opposition we've really gotten, Zach, in our conversations has been one of priorities. Lawmakers saying, this COVID pandemic economy is terrible. We just have other things on our plate. But in Oregon, there's a really interesting example of this where ABC, maybe not everyone's favorite corporate news outlet, but pretty popular one, ran a segment where they interviewed one advocate for decriminalization, and she laid out the case pretty well. They interviewed her for maybe 30 seconds. Then they cued really long, dramatic music, and your heart stops and it slows. And they talk to a few people who have experienced addiction, been, at that horrible low point in their life where they're stealing from family or on the streets. And they said that jail helped them. Well, there's countless people they didn't interview that jail made their addiction worse. Jail made them lose their job. Jail made it to where they couldn't get access to student aid to go back to school. And that dramatic music was also somewhat ironic, because the advocates they were speaking to didn't say they were against decriminalization. That was kind of the editorializing that they were doing with the music. And I don't know what exact agenda was behind that, but even the advocates they interviewed as like opponents were pretty weak opponents. They weren't like strongly against decriminalization. They just said that, sometimes people need motivation in order to get help, which is absolutely true. And Oregon's solution either gives you a $50 civil penalty or requires you to do a health screening. And our coalition has filed a similar bill this year because, some folks are not going to get that help on their own. We can nudge people toward those remedies. So I hope that clears up, making these alternatives available to everyone. And I'm sure Jen can speak with way more power on that than I can.
Well, actually, James had sent me a link to that interview that happened in Oregon, and one of the things that struck me was the rehab industry had opposed it basically because it wasn't good for business, because people weren't going to jail and weren't being sent to their rehabs where they're going to make money. They weren't happy that people's lives weren't being destroyed or that there were alternatives for them to get better. They were disappointed that they weren't making as much money, which was a real upset for me. And I'm hoping other people around the world that are now starting to see that rehabs are not designed to make people better. They're designed to keep people on them so they can generate money long term. As far as my experience, when I did the Ibogaine, I knew that I was going to need help. So I actually enrolled in an outpatient program here in Massachusetts. And I wanted to scream from the rooftops what I had done, but I was highly encouraged not to. And when I had discussed that I had done Ibogaine, it surprised me at how everybody, including all the high ups in that organization, had no idea what I was talking about. And so to me, it was... and they didn't seem to want to know. So when I'm trying to explain to them what it was, I kept getting cut off and shut down and basically told not to talk about it in the group settings. I tried the NA and the AA group because I was looking to, continue finding like people like myself who were struggling. But what I found was, for me, and this isn't true of everybody, but for me, the AA/NA mentality kept me the same mentality as being a drug addict. So, and what I mean by that is, you go to a meeting and they tell you, you got to go to meetings every day. And in the beginning, you got to go to 5 or 6 meetings. And if you don't show up, you're going to use and you're going to die. And so to me, that was the same mentality that I would wake up as an addict, like, oh my God, if I don't go out there and I don't find my drugs, I'm going to die today. And so it kept me in that very anxious cycle of if I don't do this, I'm going to die. And to me, it wasn't conducive to my healing. And I actually had to remove myself from it and find other ways. And actually, it wasn't until I had done psilocybin for my migraines that I really started to get in touch with what my root causes were, and was able to then bring it to a counselor and talk to my counselor about, okay, these are the things that I'm dealing with. I didn't even see how my personality and the way I react to things in life is a trauma-based reaction to a lot of things. Even though like it might be a minuscule thing that I'm dealing with, I'm reacting in a big way that's just not conducive to anybody. And so it's been through those realizations that I've actually been able to heal in that way. And like I said, that was my experience with that industry, that they really just didn't seem to want to hear what I had to say. I wasn't presenting it as a cure, but I was presenting it as a massive tool towards a cure. That this is a huge step, that I walked out of my Ibogaine treatment about 12 months ahead of where I would have been if I had walked out of a 5-day detox. It reset my brain. It let me know, and I wasn't craving drugs. So although I was dealing with a lot of emotional trauma, I wasn't feeling like, oh my God, I've got to use that. That part of me had really been suppressed. And so I felt like it was a huge tool and something that other addicts should know about, but I was not encouraged to discuss it.
Well, absolutely. And it really goes to what you're saying about how, it's not in the best interest of this industry for this treatment to be widely available or widely known about, because it takes away from their, profit-driven mission. And that really goes to this whole problem at large. Obviously, how many drugs are existent just to replace these natural medicines? You were mentioning the headaches. How many companies exist to profit off of that ailment, while the actual solution is right there? Obviously, the same thing with cannabis. How many diseases and ailments and various conditions has cannabis proven to treat? It's even proven to have potential in treating cancer sometimes. There's whole industries around that too, that it's not in their best interest to have these natural medicines legal. And it really just proves that the illegality and suppression of these drugs is about maintaining this capitalist system that exists in their absence, honestly. And it's really disgusting to see. And that's why that's why I mentioned earlier my concern, with collaborating with these very industries that have profited off of their illegality and made sure that they remain suppressed. I'm reminded of it wasn't in the tobacco company's interest for cannabis to be legal, because they knew it would take their profits. Well, now we see Philip Morris buying into cannabis, and now we finally see it becoming illegal. And it's just such a shame.
Next you're going to see Anheuser-Busch buying the cannabis, and then it's going to go federally legalized.
And I guess, obviously progress must come at any cost. It's just such a shame that it has to sometimes come at the enrichment of these villains and of these forces of corporate obstruction to what is the answer.
Couldn't agree with you more. Medicine became a for-profit industry about 30 years ago, and that was the worst thing that could have happened to the medical industry. And actually, it was a podcast that I was listening to a while back, and the guy had said, if you go to your doctor with a problem and the first thing they do is pick up their prescription pad, you need to walk out immediately, because nobody is chemically deficient in this world. We don't really need chemicals. We need diet changes. We need lifestyle changes. We need exercise and sunlight and water. and things that we're not told about. People go to the doctor and they think they're going to get a pill and they're going to be all better. And little do they know that that pill is actually also making them sick in other ways. There is a need for medicine out there. So I'm not just trying to say that, medicine is a useless tool. There's a need for it, but it's usually for short term, to get through a crisis. And once you learn how to change and adapt your life in a more healthy way, you should no longer need many of the medications that people are receiving.
I have a very, very minimal, experience with that. But like my whole childhood, I went to countless doctor's office, right? Like, oh yeah, Zach, your brain works different. Like you can't fucking pay attention to shit, right? Like you're going to get in trouble more and life's going to be hard for you. Take these amphetamines and you'll be fine. And it's like, now I'm a grown man and I haven't taken fucking Adderall and, however long. And, I don't feel, any deficient, right? Like of course, like everybody has neurotic whatever, right? We all have our shit, but I'm not like living a broken lifestyle, right? Because I'm unable to survive and sustain myself without the amphetamines, right?
You're probably doing better. Yeah,
exactly. There are so many side effects to that we can get into, right? But from not eating to mood swings, especially when you're giving it to people who are young, right? I can consider multiple examples of myself being 15, 16 years old, abusing my own medication, going through like extreme, emotional duress, right? This happens to so many people, right? It's almost become like a common thread of people of our generation, right? Like everybody's either experienced like, oh, I was pumped with too much Adderall or Vyvanse, or oh, I was pumped with too much Xanax or Klonopin. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, which side of the coin were you on? If you're, from this like Gen Z younger millennial side, like that was kind of the solution to a lot of the societal ailments that were cocked up, right? And
when you probably just needed to go run a mile, play some soccer,
exactly.
Burn some energy or something.
Well, it's crazy, right? Because they take kids who get in trouble in school, and then your punishment is during recess. You don't get to have recess. You have to sit on the side of the fence and watch all these. You're just like, what are you doing? Like, anyway, yeah.
And I would just add that, Adderall has been prescribed to kids as young as 5 years old. Mm-hmm. Disproportionately, kids of color are prescribed those medications when, fundamentally a lot of like misbehavior first has to do with the kids that aren't meant to sit in classrooms for entire days to learn material. That's not the best model of learning for most kids. And then second,
shocker, right?
Shocker. And then also that, chronic poverty and inequality in our country doesn't make people super mentally fit or mentally sound either. So instead of treating the root cause of, our woes, that inequality and that lack of opportunity for people, or even just nihilism that has overtaken a lot of people.
Yeah, Johan Hari writes really well about this. He's a British author. He's written extremely well on the addiction crisis and also depression for anybody that wants to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And to zoom back out to what Gavin mentioned about, how the war on drugs dovetails with neoliberal capitalism. One thing that I discovered in researching and creating posts for base daters for natural medicine in Massachusetts is the Brahmin class, the really wealthy white people who have historically been the governors and senators from Boston and the state of Massachusetts. Partially. Even the Delanos, for example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's one side of his wealthy family, they actually made their fortunes selling, opiates or opium to China illegally when the emperor banned it there. And that money, ironically, built Mass General Hospital, one of the biggest systems in the state. So, even in its very, very infant form of mercantilism, capitalism was using the war on drugs to build itself. And one thing I always like to say is drugs are already legal. The debate whether drugs should be legal is over because they already are legal. They're just legal for certain people, and they're legal for certain corporations to sell them to you. Opiates are an obvious example, but one of the members of our team had a traumatic brain injury when a stove fell on her head. And she was prescribed a medication, and she looked at the ingredient list. And one of the ingredients is tryptamine. Tryptamine is one of the active ingredients in psilocybin. And so it's just ironic that there's countless examples of drugs being legally pushed on people by the consultants at McKinsey working with Purdue Pharma. But then, there's an interest in U.S. foreign policy globally to make sure it's illegal, so that they can help certain drug cartels, or they can work with warlords in Southeast Asia. So there's a reason why drugs are illegal, and it's multivariate. I wouldn't just say it's for profit. There's also a lot of just racism involved, like in the early days of Nixon's war on drugs. But happy to get into that. I just think
this is all good stuff. 100%.
You brought up opium, and I'm actually wondering what your guys' stance is on the drug, because it also has a history of being used for medicinal purposes, but obviously in its current forms that we see prescribed by big pharmaceutical companies, it's very refined. I don't know a lot about the subject, but I was just wondering if you have a stance on opium.
I believe that opium is a completely necessary medicine out there. I think the way that it's been prescribed and used today, I feel like a lot of it's just lack of education. But opium in its true form, much like cannabis, when you smoke cannabis in its true form and you keep it all together, the alkaloids in it actually all work together and are very much more conducive to our body. We have opiate receptors in our body, so we're meant to take it for things like pain and pain management, but for short periods of time. I think that the way we've synthesized it and split it all apart, oxycodone has different receptors in it than, let's say, Vicodin or hydromorphone. So they've split it all up. They've taken the plant and split it up into little pieces and then divvy it out. And so it's not as effective as it would be if you just gave a small dose of straight opium. So I don't think that opium itself is actually the enemy. I think the way that it's been synthesized and marketed out there is the problem with it.
Yeah. On a similar note, I guess, in one of the last kind of prepared questions I had for you guys, because I wasn't entirely sure what your guys' thoughts on the matter were. What do you guys think about synthetic psychedelics, and what's your position on it? Right, like something like LSD, right, which obviously has a lot of misinformation, propaganda in the same way that a lot of other drugs do. However, from what I've seen, it hasn't ever been included in a lot of the same like extremely beneficial medicinal studies, right? It's typically psilocybin, and entheogens. If it was a synthesized drug, maybe MDMA. I'm not really an expert on the science of these kinds of things, but I'm just wondering, in your guys' research and experience, what separates that LSD kind of experience from a mushroom experience, because from the uninitiated perspective, you might say that they're pretty similar if you've experienced both.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. There are actually a lot of studies that kind of lump LSD and psilocybin together. I think a really great example, and a study that we use and reference, is a 2017 one by Johns Hopkins that surveyed 44,000 Americans and found that psychedelic use, even once or twice in a lifetime, is associated with a 40% reduced risk of opioid abuse. So it's associated, it's not a double-blind trial, but what that indicates is, unlike other drugs where there's an association between using them and then, potentially using harder drugs,
gateway drugs,
it seems to be the opposite for LSD and psilocybin in general. And, to speak to the science, I'm not a scientist. We have folks in our group who could wax poetic about the specific molecules involved, but LSD has very similar benefits when microdosed to psilocybin. It has very, very similar psychoactive
that makes
effects.
Sense, right? It's just not from the earth.
Yeah. Right. And one issue with LSD is, for example, that it can, because it's illegal and we have a black market, there can be other adulterates added to it. Whereas psilocybin, there's still risks involved with, like, for example, picking your own mushrooms from cow patties. Like, you could potentially get the wrong type of mushroom. It should be dangerous. People should actually check out some resources we share off our Instagram page, How to Trip Safely, in our link.
Which is really important, by the way, because I do think if anybody's listening, right, like there's a lot of complimentary things to say about psychedelics, and, a lot of people have found tremendous, benefit. And it's, of course, extremely important that these be available to people who need them and have safe, nourishing experiences. That being said, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like 16 years old, don't just get an eighth of mushrooms and just decide to eat them one day. Like maybe some people who host this podcast may have done in their youth. Like, you know, it's a really sensitive thing where you should be with people who know what's going on, and you should also be of sound, developed mind yourself.
Yeah, setting an intention are both two key components to having a productive and worthwhile psychedelic experience. You need to be with the right people. You need to be in the right setting, and sometimes that means just being among friends, but in a safe environment where you can be somewhere where you can kind of just be yourself and let loose, or in a more structured environment with a guide, depending on what your intention is. Is very key.
And a lot of the really bad and negative experiences that people do have on, you know, these natural occurring psychedelic substances can probably be explained by their illegality, by the paranoia that's associated with doing something that is criminal and that
Having
has
to be discreet.
Yeah, having to be discreet, hide it from your, you know, parents or whatever authority figure, and the general kind of stereotypes that are associated with these drugs. You know, people might be deep in a trip and then start internalizing some of these stereotypical notions about the kind of people that use psychedelics, and that can send you into, you know, a crisis emotionally. So
I'm gonna become the next Sid Barrett.
Yeah, and obviously the education, you know, is another important reason to legalize and regulate these drugs, because along with legalization and normalization comes that education, comes an increased awareness of and understanding of, you know, the correct and most, you know, productive way to engage with these substances.
And what I would add to Gavin, extremely well said, is sometimes you will have an experience that's uncomfortable, even with the right intentions and setting. But for some folks, those are the most beneficial spiritual experiences of their entire lives. If you go into it with the intention to explore something like PTSD or trauma, those feelings are really uncomfortable. But that work and that spiritual work could help you the rest of your life to overcome and work through those emotions. So bad trips, quote unquote, they might happen, but they can still be hugely positive experiences for people's lives, especially if they're at home on your couch with warm blankets, maybe some cool lights, a friend to trip sit you. It might not be the most comfortable experiences at periods of that 4 hours, but what I'll you know, lean into and promise is that if it's done with intention, you can get something out of it. I also wanted to mention that some value we might be able to create to your audience is actually how we've organized. There's lots of groups that have fallen victim to infighting and haven't made much progress, but
you've watched our show or experienced life as a leftist in America. Yeah, it's a real treat.
Yeah, it's a real treat to see leftists constantly infight with each other while the right
they can tell a party line really quick. It's just, you know, quickly devolves into fascist.
Sure, absolutely. So maybe we could speak to that a little bit, like our organizing principles and just how this has all worked out so well.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear it.
Sure. So this group actually started just with me getting on LinkedIn, probably the worst social media ecosystem in the world. But there is a guy named Chi who's a guide for people on psychedelic journeys in Costa Rica. And I'm like, wow, something interesting on LinkedIn. This is bizarre. So I messaged him. I said hi. And he said, why don't I introduce you to some folks in Massachusetts who are passionate about this too? So I met with Jen, just called her up on the phone. We got to know each other, met with 6 other advocates, and then convened everyone into a meeting that was, you know, thankfully really organized. I put together all the research, the information, and we were going to take action at that meeting. We weren't just going to talk. We did do quite a bit of talking and strategizing, but we were actually going to take action together, because sending emails, leaning into it is not fun, but it's work that has to be done. So every time we meet as an organization, we have action hours, meaning that the last 30 minutes or so, you're actually sending those emails to a lawmaker and making progress. Some other principles that we had were losing is winning. Even when you have a conversation with a lawmaker starting out, they're not interested, they don't seem persuaded, you're still moving the needle. You're still making progress. They're going to talk about that at the dinner table with their family. They might know someone who's extremely depressed and might benefit from even hearing that this is a possibility for them. So don't give up, don't get discouraged, but structure your vision around small wins, because people like to internalize that small win. Even getting a meeting with your lawmaker is really exciting. So, losing is winning. Small wins matter a lot, because that's what creates the chorus toward getting a decriminalization resolution, for example, passed in your city.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the decriminalization resolutions that have been passed by your guys' coalition in Somerville and Cambridge that made national news and opened the door to resolutions in Boston, Northampton, and other places in Massachusetts. That's according to your guys' one of your guys' website. Maybe if you could just share some details about the victories that you've already won already.
Absolutely. So in Somerville, where I live, we were lucky enough to get 3 advocates to email a counselor, Jesse Klingen. And Jesse's a really great guy. He has friends who have passed away from opioid addiction and have gone through that hell. And in that conversation, we really connected when I brought up that psilocybin has an 80% clinical response rate for people with terminal illness, depression. Jesse's mom had just passed away from breast cancer. And, it was hard not to tear up in that meeting, like when he realized how this could have helped his mom. So what I'll say is, when you share those personal stories, and, we have the research briefs to share, people don't have to reinvent all this advocacy material. It's already out there. When you share that evidence, it's hard for a lawmaker to look a constituent in their face and say, I'm not going to do anything about this. In Somerville, we actually delayed our original vote because we put forward a resolution that was just going to decriminalize these plants. And we decided to wait and get a little more buy-in, have people call the counselors a little bit more, so that we could decriminalize possession of all controlled substances. That makes us pretty different than what happened in Denver, other cities, Ann Arbor. And it's not to disparage those folks. I mean, we learned so much from them. Decrim Nature has laid the groundwork for a lot of our victories. They've normalized this a lot. It's to say that when you have the opportunity to strike a blow at the entire war on drugs, you should take it.
Hell yeah.
And Cambridge, followed shortly thereafter, because these cities are both quite progressive and a lot of the same circles form. Another piece of advice, just practically from doing this, is, have an Instagram page that produces real high quality content. Actually have conversations with your volunteers. Don't assume that they're going to sign whatever petition or send whatever emails you ask them to. Have that conversation. Ask them why this is meaningful to them. Our action hours are structured such that when people come to a meeting, it's only six or some people, so no one feels anonymous. And we start by sharing our story and really being personal and being open and honest with each other about
creating
how
community.
This has helped us. Creating community. And, after you've heard incredibly powerful stories, even though those emails suck at the end, the templates you'll give to volunteers to use, they're not fun. People still do them because you're doing it together, and you've just heard how this has changed not just your life, but lots of people's lives. So you can structure meetings such that people get excited to take action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important. And it's definitely something that I think we could all, learn from, as activist organizers, people who want to see shit happen, just working people who need this. I like Gavin and I always say, like, there is no mythical activist out there, right? They're just people who want to see shit happen. And an activist is somebody who takes the first step to make it happen. So, there's no like activist building where you go to get your activist permit, right? Like, we're all people that are capable of doing this. And I just wanted to thank you both, James and Jen, for the work that you're doing, and for coming on our show and spreading the word as well. It's really important. And we're behind you guys. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we really do. Thank you guys for reaching out and for coming on our show to share the mission of your guys' organization. It's such important work, like Zach said, and we really do consider these movements to medicinalize and give back, people access to plants that grow, natively on their own lands. We consider that to be the definition of a movement on the vanguard. And like I said, just thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see this group, yield some success. Obviously, the progress that's been made, just from a cultural perspective, I think is already immense. People, coming to understand and appreciate these substances for what they are, and it's just ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous that in the so-called land of the free, we can't even, use the plants that are here for a very obvious reason. If you believe in God or religion, it's like, what do you think these plants are here to do? It's pretty obvious, the medicinal, therapeutic, healing potential, and it's a crime in and of itself, that they are illegal, that people are in jail or dealing with criminal charges as a result of their,
or just living in fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you guys for the, brave work you're doing. Obviously, there still is a lot of stereotypes and preconceived notions about this stuff. So you guys are obviously, putting yourselves in a little bit of a, I'm sure, uncomfortable position sometimes, having to explain to people that may not understand the nature of your work. But we do support you guys, and thank you so much. We hope to speak again.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for even having us and helping us spread the word. People like you guys are what help our cause get out there. And I honestly never thought that I would be somebody that would be able to make a change. It's something I've always wanted to do. So be a part of this is, I can't even explain how good it makes me feel. And knowing that on the other end, there's going to be people whose lives are going to be saved, that there's going to be sons and daughters that aren't overdosing, mothers and fathers who aren't missed tomorrow because there's actually something out there that can change their lives. And I really appreciate you guys giving us a voice and allowing us to get that out there, that we're not just looking to throw parties and, trip out and have a good time. I mean, yeah, we would like that once in a while, but we're also looking to actually make a difference in the world. And I have a granddaughter, and it's my goal to leave this world a safer and happier place for her, because where it's going right now kind of terrifies me. So really, really appreciate this opportunity.